Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the IDC European FutureScape 2019 Predictions webcast. My name is Thomas Meyer and I'm the Group Vice President for IDC's European Research Unit. And it gives me the great pleasure to host this webcast yet again with Phil Carter, our Chief Analyst here in Europe. Hi, Phil.
Hey, Tom. Thank you very much. And a warm welcome from my side. I'm looking forward to an action-packed and interactive session.
That's great. Yeah, absolutely. So that's what we're hoping for. Now, what's happened is that we got to this place with a whole lot of our analysts working together, and we try to practice what we preach. So tell us a little bit more about that, Phil.
It's true, Tom. So over the last 3 months, we've developed a new way of working, a new way of developing these predictions. So we've had 15 squads working as in an agile fashion with product owners, scrum masters, data gurus, content developers, to come up with bold, evidence-based, but also topical predictions that we think are going to shape the year ahead in 2019.
That's great. So we've had the analyst teams working on this, but those weren't the only inputs. In fact, all the analyst teams have been working in some form, shape, with a whole number of communities.
Absolutely, Tom. So historically, we would normally get feedback from, in our data surveys, our trackers, and also vendor engagements. But now increasingly we're getting inputs from the startup community through our research innovation councils and also our advisory boards, whether it be CIO, digital executive or CISO advisory boards.
Okay, that's great. So we've had a whole lot of inputs for this session. And what we'd like to do actually is continue the conversation. So I would like to ask all of you out there, if you're watching live, you can use the platform, or join us on the Twitter. We've got a tweet jam going, in fact. So use Twitter, send us some questions, send us some comments. Let us know how you feel about the predictions. Tell us how you feel about the next few years. But before we go into that, Phil, let's have a quick rewind and talk about 2017. What did we say then about 2018?
Yeah, we always have to do this, right, Tom?
Oh, we do.
Check on how things were.
Correct.
How well did we do last year?
How did we do?
So I think overall, pretty well. Okay. I think had a successful set of predictions. I mean, the one that stands out where maybe not as close to the mark as we would have liked is on the GDPR compliance for the cloud service provider. Now, we don't think it's as likely as we expected then that there will be this legal action against one of these cloud service providers, given the amount of investments that these cloud service providers have made in GDPR compliance over the last 12 months.
Hopefully heeding our advice last year.
Well, that's what we hope. We think they've been listening to us, and therefore they've made the investments in GDPR. So that was the one. The other one where we were also a bit of a question mark was AR, VR going mainstream. We haven't seen that. We've seen a lot of vendor activity, startup activity, particularly in gaming, in the educational space as well, but not necessarily going as quickly into enterprise in the mainstream basis that we expected. The other one is cloud. Now, there we underestimated how quickly cloud was going to grow. And so we said that 100 billion was going to be hit by 2021. Well, it's going to be a lot quicker than that. And we'll talk more about that during the course of this session.
That's great. Yeah. Okay, good stuff. So we did reasonably well last year.
Yeah,
very well.
Did we hit the benchmark?
Yeah, I think we did.
Okay.
I think we did.
Right.
I'm
glad to hear that the KPIs have been met.
Absolutely. So what we're trying to do this year is to take you through some of the macro factors that are affecting, I think, all of us in some way, shape or form. We'd also like to talk a little bit about a reset that we're seeing, and that's really brought in by a digital reality check to see, okay, so what are those investments that we've made? What are those transformation activities really delivering to the bottom line and to the organization overall and to the competitiveness? And for that, we're really trying to bring a new framework out during this webcast to say, okay, here are some things, here's a blueprint for the multiplied innovation era that you really need to look at going forward. So hopefully we'll give you some practical advice and guidance, both on a strategic level as well as in terms of some near-term goals.
It's a digital blueprint. It's a digital blueprint for multiplied innovation.
Okay, we need to keep that digital word in there. Eventually it's going to be business as usual, but for now it's a digital blueprint.
Exactly.
Thank you for that. So let's start with what we're seeing. So when I looked at the news today, FTSE is down quite considerably back to 2016 levels, but there are also some other factors that are impacting the macro level.
Yeah, so we see multiple risk factors at this stage, Tom. Obviously Brexit, the political volatility, trade wars, economic slowdown. Actually, in terms of the European forecast for GDP growth for next year, it's coming below 2% for the first time in a while. So this year is about 2.5%, 2018. So 1.7 to 2% is the expectation for 2019. Linked to these risk factors. It's clearly having an impact on business operations. But obviously, what we're looking at is the impact of these risk factors on technology spend. So we thought, let's go out as part of our preparation for today and get some feedback from the technology buyers out there.
Because I thought that looked quite interesting, actually. I was surprised somewhat.
Yeah, so this is the feedback. This is data fresh out of the field. This week, a quick poll that we did of our advisory boards, to the extent to which Brexit and the trade war are going to have an impact on their technology spending plans next year. And as you can see here, very little impact. So very little, a small number of organizations that are saying that it's going to have an impact. And where it is having an impact, it's really about shifting spend. So shifting spend potentially out of the UK into Western Europe or other regions as a result of Brexit, and the similar sort of mentality as a result of the trade war. So, but overall, it's not going to have we don't see this changing the IT spend in Europe in 2019 as of this stage.
So despite the volatility, in terms of tech spending, we have I would say it's quite a reasonable amount of stability that we're looking at for the moment.
From a technology standpoint.
From a technology perspective.
Exactly.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
But so when I look at that, how should I be thinking about the future though, and how would I frame this? Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. So, okay, now this is where we're going to introduce a bit of a twist for this session, Tom, if you're okay with that. Are you comfortable with that?
I'm comfortable.
So imagine that you are a CEO of a large European organization, okay, and you've had to explain to the board that Brexit and the trade war is not necessarily going to impact your technology spend, might impact business operations. But their first question to you is, what about our digital transformation strategy? How is that going? Because you, as we're seeing with a lot of other CEOs in the region, are under increased pressure to deliver outcomes linked to the digital transformation strategy. And that is linked to the amount of spend that has happened this year. So over the last 12 months, IDC's data shows that $200 billion has been spent on digital transformation initiatives, growing at just under 20% over the previous 12 months. A lot of money being spent on digital transformation.
So if I'm the CEO, I want to see some return on that. That's basically where you're going with
exactly,
this. Okay.
Exactly. So if we look at this and say, okay, you're spending all this money, where is the return? Where is it going to be coming from? If we look at this in the context of the overall spend in Europe, which is about 483 billion on IT, growing at only 2.5%, how come we're spending so much on digital transformation and it's growing so much faster? And it reflects a situation in the market that we're seeing at the moment, where a lot of organizations have started some really cool experiments, some interesting POCs, some different approaches to the way that they run their business, but they're not seeing the results. They're really not seeing the results at this stage. And so based on our latest maturity benchmark, we see that 3 in 4 organizations are still what we would call stuck on their digital journeys. So 76% of organizations in Europe have not got past stage 3 of the 5-stage model in terms of the maturity assessment.
Okay. So that's a big number.
It's a big number. It's a big number. And so we refer to this phenomenon as the digital deadlock. And so what your board is asking you as the CEO is, how are you going to change this? How are you actually going to deliver on the promises that you made in terms of digital transformation a few years ago?
So this is where I need now to think about that blueprint, the digital blueprint for multiplied innovation. So if I'm looking at this, who do I need to pull in for that and to develop that blueprint for my organization?
So this is where your digital dream team comes into play, right? So this is a group of stakeholders that we've put together that are part of your management team. So now you go back to your management team and say, the board, they're putting me under pressure here. I'm feeling the heat. Okay, we need to deliver. And the job titles are not necessarily relevant here. It's really, so these are a combination of technology leaders, but also business unit leaders that are going to help you deliver this blueprint.
Right. And they also need to work together. That's the key.
Hopefully. That would be the plan. But it's also linked, the key thing here is that they need to have the right skills for this role. And generally, what we are seeing is that most of these leaders have a lot more technology expertise as part of this digital dream team in order to execute on this digital transformation strategy.
Okay, so that's great. So I've got my dream team sitting together here. So I now need to develop a blueprint. And the way we're looking at this is around 5 pillars.
Exactly. So your dream team has put together this blueprint, cutting across 5 key areas that you can then go back to your board and present in a very confident and concise manner. And what we want to try and do for this session is to highlight the key predictions as it relates to those 5 areas that will frame 2019, which will basically become your plan or your presentation back to the board.
Okay. So that's great, because what we're going to kick off is probably one of the areas that as a CEO I most naturally feel aligned with and look at most, which is the financial piece. So shall we kick off with that?
Well, I would just say one thing, Tom.
Okay.
Financials is for sure is your focus as the CEO, but bear in mind that all 5 of these areas are critical to execute on to ensure that you deliver on the digital transformation.
So it's not picking on one, you have to really drive all of these at the same time, and none of those is more or less important than the other.
Exactly, exactly. You got it.
Okay, excellent. So that's a starting point. So why don't we start kicking off with a view of the financials? So can you talk a little bit about, because this is part of the digital reset or the digital reality check.
Exactly.
So how does this work now?
Yeah, so we talked about the deadlock. Now, to get out of the deadlock, you need to reframe. We need to say, reset. Let's get this new reality in place. And what that requires is a new definition of ROI, which is the return on innovation is the new ROI. So 2019 is the year when we start to make money from digital with the return on innovation as the new ROI. Now, in order to do that, you need a different financial roadmap. Okay, so this is where you need to think about, okay, we start now, but we've got to look to the longer term as well. So we see 3 horizons on this roadmap. In the short term, you've got to think of moving away from just cost optimization efforts to drive digital. It
because we see that a lot, right?
Too much of that. So we need to drive capital investments to fund digital in the short term, but with the view that in the medium term, digital is funding itself. So there's no more subsidization from the other business units. But with the longer term, 2028, the 10-year time frame, that digital is funding the rest of the business, because this lines up with one of our key predictions that by 2028, 75%, so 3/4 of the European organizations will be digital native enterprises, so completely digitally transformed. And if they don't, they won't actually make it. They'll be out of business. But
that also means, I guess, a reset. If I look at those horizons in terms of how I measure the business and how I show success.
Exactly. So we've now got to start measuring things like data capitalization, digital share of wallet, employee and customer advocacy, to set the new metrics for the value of digital. So that you can go back to your board and explain how these investments are actually translating into something that they can understand from a financial standpoint.
Right. So this is a conversation we actually have a lot with a number of our advisory board members and across all industries, in fact. Are there some good examples, perhaps, that we can highlight here?
So there's a very good example, unfortunately not from Europe. It's actually DBS Bank in Singapore, which is already reporting financially externally on the digital value creation, so separating their traditional business from their digital business and highlighting the impact of that digital business on the return on equity linked to that, which is pioneering in some respects in terms of translating this into a financial statement that the CEO and the CFO can actually present as part of their earnings statements.
And we've seen some examples here in Europe as well. We mentioned some actually last year as well. Siemens was one of those that's starting along that line. But we've also got a European one that's a little bit more recent.
Yeah, so Société Générale just launched this recently. So the chief executive launched a day of digital speed dating. So you can imagine that, Tom, digital speed dating. But the point here is that to win over investors, he brought them into a day where they could test out the digital services, experiences, and products that they were taking to market with the view to winning them over. Now, that's a proactive approach. and it's critical to do this because investors need to see the outcomes, or at least some level of outcomes,
Sure.
of the investments that are going in. And he said that they're 2/3 of the way through this journey, so they want to start to be able to show some of those outcomes. The flip side is that if you're not proactive along those lines, then what can happen, which we've seen with a CPG company in the US, is that an activist shareholder publishes a white paper with a view of getting a seat on your board to say you're not making enough investments according to the industry benchmark around digital as you should be, and therefore you need to shake things up a little bit, which then puts you on the back foot a little bit as the CEO or the board, basically, at that point.
So basically, I guess what you're saying is you either do this proactively or reactively, but there's no choice. If you don't do it, though, then the end could potentially be nigh. Maybe that's a little bit
well, I think you've got to understand the risk of not transforming.
Right.
That's the risk that you've got to take into account as you present your value creation metrics for the future.
Okay. So as the CEO, so I like that. Okay, so I've got the pressure, right? So I need to start reporting on this. Now, if you look again at the pillars, right? So we've got financials. But then I obviously need to prepare for that world that I can report those kind of success metrics that are relevant in the new world, effectively. Yeah. So again, can we talk a little bit about how I would go about that from a strategy perspective?
So for us, the strategy is the starting point. So if you don't have the right integrated, enterprise-wide strategy that reflects your digital vision, you're going to really struggle. Right? And we see this gap emerging between those that are putting in this enterprise-wide strategy around digital versus the ones that are going about it in an impromptu or ad hoc fashion. So that's the first point. Now, linked to that enterprise-wide strategy, you need a very strong mission, right? Okay. A mission that is inspiring to your teams, that is competitive over the longer term, but that gets buy-in from every single stakeholder in your organization, because that's going to be critical. So as an example, let's take Schindler. I mean, so Schindler is a company based out of Switzerland that manufactures lifts and escalators. Now, their vision for the future is to become a platform for passenger experiences as we come into work or as we go into a shopping mall, right? And then sell services in that lift linked to retail, hospitality, or whatever type of other capability that they can bring to the table. So that's the mission. Now, based on all of our discussions with our end user customers, that mission then translates into what we would call the Horizon 3 of your roadmap that you need to put in place to support your strategy.
Okay, so maybe let's look at that roadmap and what that could look like.
So we've got 3 horizons on this roadmap. The third horizon reflects that mission. So the use case that reflects that mission is in Horizon 3. Now that then needs to be reverse engineered to the medium term, which is what you're going to do in that time frame. But then comes back to the here and the now, the Horizon 1. So what happens now? And so that reverse engineering process needs to make it clear to your employees that they've got this wonderful mission. So if you're Schindler, to become this passenger experience platform, but what do we do right here, right now?
And you brought an example along, I think, just to make that a little bit more colorful and
exactly, because this is a use case journey where the use cases are business value oriented, that are measurable, coming back to the importance of measuring them, and then you get the quick wins associated with that, and that everyone can buy into as a result. Now, this example is for retail. So imagine you're a retailer, and all retailers want to be able to deliver highly personalized products at scale through digital channels. So in this case, Horizon 3 would be the experiential commerce platform. Now, in order to deliver those capabilities, in Horizon 2, you need to be able to have trained machine learning algorithms which are able to offer you the next best offer in the moment when you need it based on that context. But in order to get to that point in Horizon 2, you've got to have the right data strategy and the platform to get the data in place so that you can feed that into those models. So you've got the Horizon 1, unified data management platform strategy, feeding into intelligent operations in Horizon 2, into Horizon 3, which is this experiential commerce platform for that retailer of the future.
So what's the key factor that makes me money in Horizon 3?
So the key factor that makes you, that's your main concern, right? So
that's what I care about. Yeah.
The key factor there is your ability to transform your whole organization across this blueprint that we've got in place, whether it be technology, organizational architecture, and also the business model to get there by that time frame. If you don't do that, with the use case journey that you put in place to get there, you're not going to make money at any level of that approach.
But I think it's fair to say as well that when we think about Horizon 3, we start thinking about an ecosystems world that's really enabled across all the different ecosystems that I play in as an organization. And maybe what would be good is to hear from Danielle at this point to see what that prediction looks like.
Absolutely.
2019 is definitely the year to start making money from digital. While digital transformation strategies shift towards the delivery of entirely new, technology-enabled business models, there is a major focus on leveraging the ecosystem to get to scale. And I'm not only talking about customers, but also suppliers, partners, and sometimes even competitors. Now, let me give you an example of a company that we have been following very closely. Klöckner is one of the major distributors of steel and metal products globally. 5 years ago, they realized that their competitive environment was changing, with some emerging disruptors coming on the horizon and offering the option to buy similar products online. Now, instead of going into a price war, they decided to transform their entire business into a platform-enabled, ecosystem-centric, data-driven revenue model. This summer, they announced their best quarter in more than 7 years, with 20% of their revenue coming from digital channels. And they expect that by 2022, 50% of their revenues will come from the services delivered through this platform. Now, this is only one example of an ecosystem-centric business model in logistics, but we have seen this happening across the board in all European industries, and this is why IDC believes that by 2021, 82% of the revenues coming from digital transformation business models will be ecosystem-centric.
Thank you, Danielle. So that's good to hear. Certainly, I like hearing that. So it's making me money. I'm in this ecosystems world. There is a different business model that I'm moving towards. It doesn't happen overnight. I think this is already what you alluded to as well. There is a process and or a time frame, a journey attached to that as well. And Klöckner went through that journey already and have progressed to some degree. But that's good. So financials, strategy. Let's talk about those business models though, because that's really the lead into what we are seeing now. So how do these change over time?
So all of our conversations at the moment, when we talk about those Horizon 3 use cases, it's all about ecosystem centricity, so an outside-in approach to running your business. Right. So moving away from this inside-out in Horizon 1 to outside-in, so ecosystem-centric, but also business model transformation. And so this slide shows you the types of business model transformations that we see happening in that ecosystem-centric world, right? So it could be platform-based revenue models, data monetization, the sharing economy, risk-reward sharing, but all involves cooperation, collaboration, engagement with external stakeholders to drive those revenue streams that are going to deliver the numbers for you as the CEO, Tom.
Big shift in business models, and later on we'll get to a big shift for the organization as well. Yeah. But this is certainly a major focus. Yeah. So if you take that forward and actually look then at in terms of how I can scale this to a significant level, because a lot of the conversations that we have are actually around, okay, this is great. It works perhaps for a part of the organization, a division, a particular use case, but how do I really scale this?
So, I mean, apart from the fact that these business models are ecosystem-centric and that they are transformational, there are the two other things that I'd like to highlight. Number one is that technology underpins them all, right? So, and then linked to that, the second point is that they are data-driven, very data-intensive business models. So if you're going to succeed over that longer-term period, you need to be able to strike the balance between security and openness to protect, manage, and leverage that data for the innovative use cases that are going to drive your company to the next level over that time frame.
Okay, and we have a prediction for that. So why don't we hear from Dominic?
Thanks, Tom and Phil. So I'm going to talk a bit now about how data privacy regulations have put digital risk management front and centre of the board agenda right now. There are two areas of impact here. First, digital risk management needs to be part of all future business models. This will help to ensure that digital trust is enabling digital transformation in an increasingly privacy-minded world. Second, any failure to effectively handle digital risk management may leave organisations open to huge penalties. New initiatives are emerging that are looking to increase the level of collaboration between privacy regulators and other elements of government to provide some guidance on how this can be done. Building on this, IDC predicts that digital risk reporting will become a standard and mandatory element of reporting within financial statements for European organisations by the year 2025. Thank you very much. Back to you, Tom and Phil.
Thank you, Dominic, for the prediction. And in fact, this was one of the major talking points at the CISO summit we had not so long ago.
2 weeks ago, right?
2 weeks ago, right?
So yeah, I mean, we had one of the CISOs of one of the large pharmaceutical organizations saying how risk is the basis for all of his conversations with his management team, upwards, sideways, downwards, everywhere. So that's every investment, every initiative, every project needs to be framed in that risk language. And what came up, which was really interesting, was this notion of moving away not from SOCs to ROCs. Right. So security operation centers to risk operation centers, and risk level agreements, and as opposed to service level agreements, which I think is a big change in the mindset. But it's a bold prediction, right, Tom? I mean, this is a notion of measuring and managing digital risk to be able to report it as part of the financial statements. That's bold, right? I think, and by 2025, there's got to be a lot of work that needs to be done around security and assuming this zero trust starting point, understanding the multiple threat actors at play internally and externally, so that you can start to manage and then measure risk to enable that digital trust in the future.
But it fits in quite well. If I'm looking at financial KPIs changing and reporting differently on digital success, then I need to take this into account. Now, here's my worry. So if I take just one small part of this compliance, and if you look at the fact that barely 8% of organizations have this automated in some form or fashion, predominantly automated at least, that leaves a whole tranche of companies that are not yet there. So I guess the next question is then, how do I bring that to scale?
To scale. Yeah, so that introduces a new technology potentially, Tom. So if we assume that these business models are moving towards this ecosystem-centric nature, and we need to strike the balance between openness and security, then digital trust needs to be a key enabler for those business models of the future. Now, in order for that to happen, you need a more distributed type of technology. So distributed ledger technologies, as we know them, and the most popular of which is getting all the attention at the moment, is blockchain, because of its consensus algorithm that verifies transactions in an immutable fashion as they flow through the network in an automated way, right? So that's what potentially, if it's used right, not every situation, but if it's used right, will start to get the sense of digital trust at scale. And why we predict that by 2020, 60% of the enterprise blockchain investments will be driven by the need to enable these ecosystem business models that rely on the secure exchange of data. And it translates into our assessment, or our forecast, that we see a $3 billion opportunity for blockchain in Europe by 2022. $3 billion. Now, 40% of that is in financial services, where we still see the biggest opportunity. And if you saw this latest syndicated loan that was executed by BBVA the last couple of weeks, 150 million with two other banks, it shows how financial services are getting to prime time with blockchain. But increasingly, we see a rebalancing of that towards supply chain and other industries as well, so other domains as well. And so this is where we see a lot of the future growth is outside of financial services. So that leads into a question, Tom, an interesting question. So what do pasta and beer have in common? Tell me, what do you think, Tom?
I think, frankly, they'll be consumed tonight after we finish it. No, but they probably have some of the ingredients are probably fairly similar.
That's true. That's absolutely right. So actually 90% of the ingredients in pasta and beer are common.
Okay.
Right? So do you know what those ingredients are?
Well, I would hazard a guess and say wheat and water.
Wheat and water, well done. You're on the right track. So this is actually an interesting use case. It is a proof of concept where a pasta manufacturer and a beer producer are now looking to share the same supply chain and inventory management systems so that they can lower the cost of delivery of their products or the creation of their products, even though they are operating or cooperating in different types of businesses entirely. So it's a new way of potentially looking at the boundaries that historically have been put in place for organizations out there. Now, the key thing, as I mentioned there, that this is a proof of concept, right? It's, at this stage, it's just a proof of concept. And it relates to our recommendation around blockchain. And so if you look at this recommendation here, what we're saying is that the CIO, the technology leader, right, in this case, really needs to be looking at ways to bring blockchain innovation projects into the mainstream. Right. Because what we found, so we did a survey of the CIO, our CIO advisory board, and said, how much blockchain adoption is there out there? They said very little within their teams. Right. But we asked the same question to the innovation leads, the leaders of innovation, and much higher. But it's all proof of concept at this stage. And so our view is that 2019 is the year that we have to get out of the blockchain POC jail in order for this to actually work.
Okay. Great. So we realize there's still a polarized discussion around blockchain. But we're taking a stand there. I guess if I'm looking at it from CEO perspective again, so trust is a fundamental piece of the puzzle that I need to look at when I'm looking at the business models as well.
Because if those ecosystem business models are going to operate, they're going to have to. The trust is critical.
Sure, right? And I need those at scale because ecosystems by default
are going to have to scale.
And they're broad, right?
Exactly.
So and they're ever expanding. But the other key, I think, for me as a CIO that I would look at is that I need, from a customer perspective, I need a absolutely game-changing experience.
Exactly, because if you can't do that, no one's going to look at your product, service, or experience that you deliver in that ecosystem. So experience is the differentiator, particularly from a customer standpoint, for these future business models.
So why don't we let Jerry explain what that means in terms of CX?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Tom and Phil. Future customer experience growth depends on you engaging with an omni-experience grouping. That means not only your customers themselves, but also your front office staff, your back office staff, your business partners, and your wider ecosystem. This ecosystem is going to require you to be engaged on three fronts: consent, conversations, and customer journeys. And those are the three elements which are going to define the next generation of customer experience. Consent is required by GDPR for you to provide the option for your customers to opt into your marketing communications. Digital trust is the most important element, an underlying platform for customer experience in the future, and AI will play a significant role in this. AI will drive relevant contextual information both to bots and to your human agents to deliver that excellent customer experience that you're looking for. The opportunity is huge. IDC forecasts that CX software spend in Europe will rise from 34 billion in 2018 to 47 billion in 2022. Thank you. Back to Tom and Phil.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you for the prediction. Now, Jerry talked in particular about the software element of the CX market. So Phil, can you give a flavor about the whole size of the market?
Yeah, so it's actually more than double that. So it's $100 billion that we're expecting by 2022. When you bring in services is the big factor there. Right. So they're trying to integrate and deliver these CX capabilities, but hardware as well. So when you bring those three together, then it's 100 billion by 2022. Okay. And I think that reflects the huge opportunity around CX. Now, there are three things that need to come together linked to what Jerry described. You need to be able to deliver the customer journey, right, to the current customer journey, the target customer experience, which is going to have to be game changers, as you described. But that needs to be fed by this intelligence framework, so Jerry talked about AI as a key enabler. So if you need to get those three right to capture those moments of truth and excel at those moments of truth in that customer journey to drive the scale that we talked about. Now,
if you get it not right, do we have an example?
We do. So this is where it can go wrong, right? So this is an example of a large Swedish bank running into some problems as a result of hiring EMEA to drive some of their CX, or customer experience capabilities. But because EMEA is an AI-assisted digital assistant and a poster child, by the way, for the industry, you see this challenge around where it can go wrong if you don't enable these customer experiences with the right AI capabilities that are integrated to the back office systems. And so this creates the reputational issues for EMEA as a result of that when things start to go wrong. But our view is that it is critical to get AI right as it relates to CX and in general as well, because our view is that moving forward, AI will be the new UI. And so increasingly, that is going to be the basis for all of the interactions with technology, with voice, as we know, being the flavor of the year for 2019. So AI will be the new UI and voice will be the flavor of the year for 2019.
Yeah, and just to confirm as well, that means from our perspective, we don't see spending on AI in any way, shape or form affected by some of these initial failures, but it's a redirection of funds because we think it's so fundamental to organizations, but they need to get the use case right.
Exactly, and so what the CEO of Nordnet explained was that they were stopping that EMEA project, but they were actually going to redirect their investments around AI to new initiatives. But you can't use these digital assistants or chatbots that are isolated from your back office system. So they need to be integrated. Otherwise, you're taking a shortcut to a dead end.
Okay. So let's move on at this point. So we've covered the financial strategy. We've talked about business models. And so far, I think I'm bought in as a CEO, right? I need to get those pillars right. There are some challenges. So I really need to pick the use cases that I get engaged in. But I also need to actually execute on this in some ways. And we actually believe that perhaps the platform discussion is perhaps the most fundamental. No, sorry, all of those pillars are the same. Sorry, apologies. But it's certainly one of the key discussion points for the blueprint.
Well, Tom, that if you can't get the technology architecture right to support those Horizon 3 business models with the right approach in terms of that architecture, it's never going to get to scale, right? The experience in that ecosystem is never going to come about. So our view is that you need to put in place an integrated, enterprise-wide technology architecture, which we call our enterprise DX platform, right? And what we see happening in most organizations is a 3-step process. So they start with islands of innovation around enterprise IT, which are not really connected. That's in the experimental phase, and the POCs all over the place, driven by line of business, ad hoc in nature. Moving to stage 2, which is all about a sidecar model, where you have a digital factory trying to prioritize the digital investments, trying to integrate those back to enterprise IT, but battling really. To stage 3, which is our enterprise DX platform, where enterprise IT is modernized on an aggressive basis to this intelligent core, which is driven by AI, machine learning type of algorithms, fed by these data pipelines coming from internal sources, but increasingly external, because that's the ecosystem, right? So it's being fed by those ecosystem engagements to redesign, recreate business processes in real time. Yeah, because that's how dynamic you have to be to survive over that longer term. So that's the approach that we see being put in place to support this enterprise DX platform over time.
So interestingly enough, I mean, we did talk about the fact that, as a CEO, perhaps I need to be a little bit more technology savvy, but that potentially means that this is one of the most fundamental decisions.
So our view is that for CEOs, but increasingly for the CIO, getting that enterprise-wide digital platform strategy right is the most important decision that you will make in the next 10 years from a architectural standpoint. But what is the first step? We are increasingly seeing that question, what do we do now? If that is our most important decision over the next 10 years, what do we do now? And our view is that you need to get the foundation right, and the foundation is cloud. It's becoming not so much if, but when. But maybe not cloud first all the time, or cloud only, but cloud enabled across the board. So a really good example is Klöckner. Now, Danielle talked about Klöckner earlier. Now, the point with Klöckner is that in order to enable that ecosystem-centric business model that she highlighted, they use a mixture of hyperscale cloud platforms, business PaaS capabilities, also SaaS, so software as a service applications, orchestrated in a multi-cloud type of dynamic in order to deliver those capabilities across the different areas of the business. But also, they have a traditional enterprise IT environment which they have to modernize, so the legacy basically, which they need to modernize across that hybrid model towards multi-cloud. So our view is that a key focus as we get this IT foundation in place is around multi-cloud, is this notion of a management capability that reduces complexity, but also deals with another very important point, which links to some data that I'm going to talk you through now. So let's talk about the hyperscalers and the influence. No, if you go back. So if we go back, so the influence of the hyperscalers on the market at the moment. So here's a question. The penetration of cloud platforms, so public cloud platforms, in terms of software spend in 2013 was 3%. So 3% of all software spend was cloud platforms. Now, what do you think it is, Tom?
Well, it's going to be double digits and growing quite strongly.
Exactly. So it's moved to 10%. By 2021, we are predicting that it's going to be more than 20%. So that's a 7-fold increase in that penetration from cloud platforms over the course of that time period. That's massive in our view, right? How quickly that's changed. So that's the one thing. The innovation is shifting towards those hyperscalers. There's that gravitational force and so all the new services are being launched from those hyperscalers.
So big impact.
A big impact. And so increasingly the CIO, so Michael Hiltiger of Klöckner, is using those capabilities because it's part of the platform that he's using, or one of the platforms that he's using. But the next point linked to that is how there's a concentration of power developing in that cloud platform space. So if you look at this chart, what you can see here is the market share of the top 3 players in 2013, which was 31%. Now, first half 2018, that's grown to 51% for the mega players, the 3 mega players.
Shift.
So AWS, Azure, Google make up that 51%. Our prediction is that by 2022, 80% of that market share will be held by 4 players. Okay, so who's the 4th, Tom?
Well, I think this is the question we're putting out to everyone.
So let's hear what you want.
Tweet us, put it in the console, let us know who you think the 4th one is. There are a few options.
There are a few options. I mean, there's some that are well known. It could be IBM, could be Oracle, could be Alibaba. So Ali Cloud coming into Europe quite aggressively. So those are the options. There might be more. Let's hear what people have to say. But I think we also need to discuss what are the success factors going to be for that 4th one. It's going to be investment in data centers in Europe, for sure. It's going to be ability to secure, and it's the whole privacy piece as well, secure the operations and the privacy piece, but also be more ecosystem friendly. So to prevent the lock-in, which is a big question mark for everyone in that space dealing with these cloud platforms. So on the one hand, you've got to modernize legacy aggressively to the cloud, as we talked about with Klöckner, not only these hybrid multi-cloud environments, but modernization of legacy, but also start to think about how you develop visibility and automation in that multi-cloud environment so that you are not locked in necessarily to one hyperscaler in one given time frame. So I think that's what technology leaders at this stage need to do about cloud in order to sustain a viable option moving forward.
So again, for me as an organization, I want to look at sourcing options. I want to keep that. I want to keep that open, and increasingly, I'm going to look at the data element of this that it drives. And again, you covered this earlier as well in terms of the data monetization piece as well. So perhaps can you give us an example of where those things are coming together in terms of both the platform as well as the data monetization piece?
Well, I think the next phase, where workloads fit across these delivery models, is going to be increasingly dependent on the data. And this takes us into a discussion on IoT, right? And the IoT discussion is getting somewhat more interesting with the evolution of edge as an angle within IoT. And it links to our next prediction. So I think we can cut across to Gabrielle to hear about where IoT data is heading in the longer term.
Can we roll, please, with Gabrielle?
The proliferation of IoT use cases in recent years is leading to a massive amount of data being produced by millions and billions of devices, sensors and actuators deployed as part of these IoT solutions. Think, for example, about video analytics for monitoring petrol station in real time to ensure safety and security, or a water dam on a remote location where preventive maintenance on equipment can save large amount of money on unnecessary trips and downtimes. It is exactly to solve IoT challenges like latency, cost and connectivity issues in remote location that edge computing come into place. IDC research shows that more than 30% of European IoT adopters are already looking at edge computing as the first step in IoT data analysis. Which is why we believe that by 2022, 50% of the initial analysis of IoT data will occur at the edge.
Thank you, Gabriele. Thanks for sharing that with us as well. So again, the question comes back though, clearly that's my spot. How do I make money of this?
That's a very good question. We've got a good example here to highlight how this could work over time. So Hauno is part of our advisory board. So they are a connected industrial oven manufacturer. The CEO a few years ago, before it was just industrial oven manufacturer. And the CEO decided, actually, we're going to connect these ovens to see how we can manage temperature, performance, maintenance type of capabilities in the context of IoT. Now, as a result of that one decision, they are the primary provider, the primary supplier of these connected ovens to Burger King and McDonald's globally.
So I assume their business has grown.
So that's the money, right? Now, think about how that goes in terms of the edge. As we move analytics towards the edge, how can you get those ovens to maintain themselves, govern or manage themselves, and deliver insights to themselves without having to move data back and forth to the cloud or the other cloud environments we just talked about. So that's where we see this market going. And the recommendation here is to identify those key edge analytics use cases which will create that monetization opportunity, because it has to be linked to monetization early on.
So it's the use case again. So we've come back quite a lot to the use case piece, right? So this is important when we think about the monetization impact.
That use case journey that we talked about in that roadmap always has to be business value creation linked to KPIs with the outcome around financials where possible.
So, and that leads back perhaps to the discussion we had as well. So I want to do this at scale. So we've got a couple of examples, I think, that you're going through in terms of who's doing this already, and they're quite different examples.
Different examples. So let's talk about Zalando quickly. So Zalando, online retailer, but brings in offline capabilities. They're moving to a platform-based business model where they're looking to become the fashion enabler of the new world, where you, if you want a cool suit, Tom, can get it delivered at scale, personalized in real time.
So you're saying my suit isn't cool?
It's very cool. But that's where they're heading towards, right? But the interesting thing about Zalando, what they've done recently, is that IT no longer exists as a function. It's embedded in pricing and in inventory and all the business units. IT is part of it. Innovation is embedded at the core, effectively, which is part of that platform strategy.
Right. So this is, if you want, more a cloud-native type company that's grown up in this world. But we also see this with other companies that are very traditional, in fact, of both their business and their history.
Exactly. So ING is a great example of this, right? So ING has transformed its whole business towards digital and platform supporting that. But the interesting thing with ING is that they have introduced new KPIs around how they deliver these capabilities. So this is the example. So historically, the mobile app from ING wasn't performing very well. And what they did was that they changed the metrics for the team developing that app, for the developers, the marketing team, the data scientists, so that they were incentivized based on the reviews in the App Store. So guess what? Every morning, first thing they do, they check the reviews of the App Store. And over time, it's got a lot better, and it's now the best performing mobile app in the banking space in the Netherlands. So,
well, and I can confirm this. So, as a consumer, I can say I've seen that shift.
Okay,
I've seen that shift with ING.
You validate.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. So that's great. So a couple of examples of how this might play out going forward, and how important this is, irrespective of where your starting point is. But clearly, what we also need to look at when we go through this 5-pillar blueprint is that the organization mirrors and maps to what I'm trying to achieve strategically in terms of the business models, in terms of the platform as well.
Exactly. So we see this correlation actually between integrated strategy to the use case journey associated with that, the technology architecture, but also the organizational structure. So that you can see on the far right of this chart how DX or innovation is embedded in the business unit. Now, how do we get there? Well, this is all about moving towards an agile approach to delivering new capabilities. So where innovation is embedded in the organizational DNA, and you have these self-forming, cross-functional teams that are developing and creating the digital capabilities in real time, in line with the expectations of the users. So we move away from these multi-year, over budget, over time software projects. And the key thing associated with this, though, Tom, is that this is not agile in IT. It's agile in the line of business. So ING, as an example, they're taking agile into sales, into HR, into all of the different business units, so that they've developed these functions themselves with the squads, similar to our squads that we talked about earlier, so that the end result, the end experience is exactly in line with what the users expect.
So that's great, and it's particularly charting that journey out for a bank. But if you just look at the banking sector alone, so assuming about 6,500 banks in Europe, you have an incredible draw on resources for the skills that you need to drive this transformation and deliver in terms of the platform, the development, and what have you. So what I would suggest is, why don't we go to Marianne, in fact, and hear what she thinks about how this is going to affect the market. Please roll.
Thank you, Tom and Phil. Organizations are finding it hard to hire IT people into their IT departments. And external providers are finding it hard to hire people with core IT skills to place out with their customers. Therefore, IT organizations are often now delaying projects or scaling them massively down. This means that many organizations are having to delay the rollout of new products and services that are heavily enabled by technology. And this means that they are looking at lost revenue opportunities. So as organizations are transforming, many are often struggling to show the payoff of the digital transformation projects. And this means that the implications of the skills gap are huge. IDC predicts that by 2020, the lack of IT skills will affect 90% of all European organizations, leading to a $91 billion of lost revenue annually. Thank you very much. Back to Tom and Phil.
Super, Mariana. That really highlights the skills gap, right, Tom? And I think what we're seeing as a link to that is that this is being driven to a large extent by the sheer volume and size of the number of applications that are being developed. So our prediction is that over the next 5 years, we will see as many apps or applications created than we saw in the last 40. So 5 to 40. And we expect 500 million new apps being created in that time frame. So
it speaks to the scale.
Exactly. That's the scale that we're talking about. And so companies are not talking about tens or 20s of applications. It's hundreds and thousands of apps, hyper agile in nature, cloud native, microservices, low-code, no-code type of environments. That's the new norm, right? But we only have a certain amount of developers. We have 5 million in Europe based on our forecast. So, and imagine they all lived in one city. But there is this issue that we need to get around, which is a shortage of people to be able to deliver these capabilities. So the recommendation here is for the CHRO, the game changer for this future of the future enterprise, the future of work, needs to be able to fill that skills pipeline, because this is a talent war. So you've got to find the data scientists, the user experience experts, all of these new types of capabilities that will deliver on that expectation around skills.
Yeah, so this is one critical aspect in terms of moving that forward and delivering, or trying to in some way deal with the challenge of the skills gap. But we also need help beyond that. So what I would like to do is move to Tom and hear what he's going to say about this.
Thank you, Tom and Phil. The adoption of robotic process automation, or RPA, is growing very rapidly today. IDC research shows that nearly half of large businesses are using robotic process automation to some extent. Interestingly, the types of robots being developed is evolving, from those performing background tasks on a server to more intelligent robots interacting directly with the staff they support. And so bots will augment the capabilities of staff, improving their speed, accuracy, and access to knowledge, especially in the IT, finance, and HR domains, as organisations look to drive the next level of automation across their key business processes. In line with this, IDC predicts that by 2022, 1 in 4 staff in large European organisations will have access to an intelligent digital assistant, helping them with routine tasks and improving their productivity by 20%. Thank you very much. Back to you, Tom and Phil.
So, Tom, I was wondering, could I get one of those, please?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. That's approved then. So I think what's clear here is that we're going to move away from talking about headcount reduction using this RPA type of capability towards improving the employee experience. And that's particularly important as you apply AI or intelligence to RPA to drive that employee experience. And we see this happening. So I was speaking to BASF the other day, and they've got an RPA shared service center where they're telling all the business process, the business unit heads, come and present your business case. We're going to automate your tasks for you and help and augment the capabilities so that the employees, the skills that are so critical, can focus on the value add, which was going to define that level of productivity moving forward. So our prediction here for the operations team is make sure you find the right business processes that are going to deliver that productivity gain in the short term so that you get that quick bang for the buck.
Okay, so it's good. So automation is key. Help is key. The skills gap is clearly a big issue. So what we've done now over the past 40 minutes or so is try to lay out that blueprint along the parameters.
What do you think? Do you think it's going to fly with your board?
I think so. I think this all sounds good. I think there are a couple of key things that we need to highlight here. So these are interrelated, and they're moving in parallel.
Yeah.
So across financial, strategy, business models, platform, and future of work, they're all moving at ideally the same speed and time. So we've put this together as a summary just to show at the top level of how this would look and how this could work. Do you want to add a couple of words to this?
Yeah, so I think this brings in the Horizon thinking to those 5 areas, right? To say what happens in Horizon 1, what happens in Horizon 2, what happens in Horizon 3, so that you have this autonomous digital platform for the gig enterprise, ecosystem enabled, that long-term view where digital funds the business.
Right. And this is where our 10 predictions for this year should help, hopefully everyone. Again, it'd be great to get your questions in and your comments as well. I'll switch over to that in a second. In fact, why don't we kick off straight away? So, Phil, one of the questions that has come in is around the industries that are most likely to grow the strongest. Do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, so it depends on the 2 levels, right? We talked about that 480 billion for IT versus the 200 billion for DX. Right. The common industry that's growing very fast across both is retail. So that's the kind of link to B2C, that disruption happening in retail, investments in both traditional IT and digital capabilities to get to actually compete against the disruptors like an Amazon. The other one that is coming through quite clearly is professional services. Again, this people-centric approach and the need to use technology to drive these new capabilities to market. And then process manufacturing is number 3.
Yeah. So, and one other, thank you for that, Phil. That's great. So, one other one that's come in. So, haven't apps already peaked? This is one of the comments here as well in terms of users, utility services. are we going to see different types of apps? Is it more moving towards voice? And I think you alluded to that as well as the interaction, the contextual kind of, I guess this is leading towards the AI is the new UI kind of.
Well, it is. I mean, I think that if you look at RPA, if you look at the digital assistants, over time, what will happen is that you won't have a bot, or it won't be there. It'll just be automated seamlessly. And therefore, it comes back to your customer or employee experience. Just happens naturally. It's automated at scale in an extreme fashion, so that we don't have to request a bot to support us at any point. It just happens.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that, Phil. And what I would like to do is, at this point, thank everyone out there as well. Please continue the conversation with us. We have a number of high-level summits where we speak quite strategically, but also quite tactically around the issues affecting the different industries, from CISO communities to the CIO community, the digital community. We have a new event around future of work that we are really looking forward to in June next year as well. Again, we'll try to get back to your questions if we can. But for the moment, it just remains for me to thank everyone for their attention. I hope you found it interesting. Keep the comments coming. We'll get back on Twitter as well. We'll answer your questions. Phil, thank you very much for taking us through the content. And obviously, a hearty thanks to all the analyst team as well that's been working on this over the past week.
They've actually created a number of documents which are available for download in the console, which I would encourage everyone to read as a follow-up as well. So there's some free content to keep everyone busy over the Christmas period and hopefully help to supplement or augment the wonderful digital blueprint for multiplied innovation.
Great reading as you move into next year. So thank you very much, everyone, and look forward to your feedback. Thanks again, Phil, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much.